Hey there guys, it's Nick, the ASMR nerd, and welcome back to another episode of Relaxing Reviews. So you might recall that one of my favorite keyboards that I have ever reviewed is the Drop Control. This is a tenkeyless keyboard that is designed and sold by Drop.com, formerly MassDrop. This is a group buy website that is well known within the mechanical keyboard enthusiast community. And the Drop Control has pretty much everything you could want. It is a fantastic, fully featured board, but it is not cheap. It comes in at $200 US, and that's a fair amount of money to spend on a keyboard, more than many people are willing to spend, especially if they're just starting to get into the hobby of mechanical keyboards. And so Drop says, we have a solution for you. It's called the Drop Enter, and that is what we are taking a look at here today. The Drop Enter is Drop's entry-level enthusiast mechanical keyboard. They're aiming it at people who maybe are buying their first mechanical keyboard or have only experienced like a real budget mechanical keyboard before, and they're looking for something that's enthusiast grade but that's not going to break the bank. Drop thinks that they have a solution for that kind of customer. The Enter comes with a solid aluminum chassis. It comes with PBT keycaps. It comes with, mechanical switches, of course, and these sort of desirable features that let someone dip their toe into the more enthusiast end of the mechanical keyboard market. At least that's the idea. And I must admit, this keyboard is not what I initially thought it was. I went into this review, this unboxing, with some preconceptions, let's say, about this keyboard. And I'm usually pretty good at doing my homework. This time, maybe not so good. So you'll hear me say a few things during the unboxing, which are actually incorrect. And I do amend that later on in the review. But just so you know, that's sort of the case here. But that's really emblematic, actually, of where I think the mechanical keyboard market is at, where most buyers are at, versus what Drop has created with the Enter. It is not what I expected based on their initial pitch. So anyway, Drop sells the Enter through their website for $90 US. $90 US. You can find a link to the Enter down below in the video description if you'd like to check it out, maybe pick one up for yourself. And of course, you can navigate the entirety of this review by using the sections in the navigation bar, the play bar, where I have it conveniently divided up into the various parts, or in the video description itself there are timestamps as well. So Drop, of course, was kind enough to send over an Enter for us to unbox, to test out, to take a look at here today. And that is exactly what you are about to see. So let's get to it. And here we have the Drop Enter in box. It's a very simple box. It's not nearly as fancy looking as the one for the Control, at least not when it was MassDrop branded, although I actually haven't seen the branding for the Drop Control, the packaging, I should say, so perhaps it's simpler as well. I will say, though, that this looks an awful lot like the box for the Control case that we took a look at in an upgrade video a while back. We swapped out the case on that keyboard, and it basically looked like this. It just has the Drop branding on the top, and other than that, it's just plain cardboard. Nothing else to see. Nothing on the front here. Nothing on the sides. And all we have on the back is a sticker that says drop, enter. It also tells us what? Exactly nothing. It has a model number and some barcodes, but manufactured in China, drop.com. Doesn't say anything about switches or colors or anything else like that. So looks like it opens up via this seal on the front here. So let's open that up. Normally I'm prepared enough to bring some kind of scissors or knife for this sort of thing, but not this time, so we're just going to attempt this like so. Just have to get the edge up here. Okay, there. Be more upset about that if the box was anything special, but it's really not. A very sticky seal. So inside, we are greeted with a white keyboard. As I said, this is a surprise to me because it doesn't say on the outside what it is, and I actually didn't even discuss with Drop which variant they would be sending. So it says here, drop enter. This is a nice thick piece of cardboard. Feels quality. Getting started with your Enter keyboard. Initial startup. The USB-C port on the Enter can be used to connect your keyboard to your computer. The keyboard should work out of the box with macOS and Windows operating systems. Function hotkeys work with Windows only. It is warranted. For how long? Doesn't say. It does say you are responsible for the cost of return shipping if a request is submitted after 2 weeks of receiving the item. Interesting. Not actually quite sure how long the warranty is. I'll have to look that up separately because it doesn't really say here. Then we've got some hotkeys on the back. I guess it would help if you could see them. Just basic media hotkeys, things like that. No, not even. Well, yeah, some media hotkeys as well. Anyhow. And then it's just a keyboard. This is, we've seen this in some other Drop packaging. It's just a little ribbon loop, which is nice because it helps lift out the keyboard. Oh wow, that's heftier than I thought. This feels quite solid, I will say. Okay, alright, let's put that aside for a second. I expected something more plasticky, honestly. That's just that. It's protected on 4 sides by just cardboard, which is nothing exciting or exotic, but it does mean that this is easily recyclable. Also worth noting, we do have a big chunk of foam right on the top here, which should keep it well protected. It's quite thick. And then there ought to be something underneath here. there is. We have a wire style keycap puller, which is great. It's nice to see. It's not drop branded or anything, but it's in white, which matches the keyboard. That's nice. It's nice to get a high quality keycap puller, relatively speaking. And then we have just a basic USB to Type A to Type C cable. Again, no drop branding, nothing fancy about it. It's not braided, it's just a typical PVC coating, but it looks like it'll get the job done. And of course it is white to match the board. So that's good. And that's everything. That's the entire package. So let's put the box away. Bring the keyboard back and take a looky at this board. So, as you can see, our enter is in white, and I believe that that comes with the Gateron yellow switches. Could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that's what we're dealing with here. It's also available with Halo Trues, I believe, is the other switch option. These are definitely linear switches, and they feel okay. I say they feel okay because I've been using the Varmillo MA108M as my daily driver for the last while, and those of you who watched that review know how much I love those Sakura electrostatic capacitive switches. They are so smooth and so stable, and they have spoiled me for typical mechanical switches. Gaterons are normally very smooth, and these are, but by comparison, I can feel some scratchiness, and they do lack a bit of stability. It's a bit of wobble, but by and large, they are just fine. So let's take a cruise around here. So we've got a perfectly typical tenkeyless layout, totally standard. So you could swap out the caps on this very easily. You can see that the top is actually made of plastic. Maybe you can't tell that just from looking at it, but I can feel it. The top is a matte plastic. And if we look around the edge, you can see that the top plate, yeah, it's a little reasonably thick plastic surface. But underneath that, what do we have here? We have a solid metal chassis. And it's like that all the way around on all the sides. So because this is Drop's entry-level budget offering, we have no edge lighting here. That's a differentiator between the Enter and the Control, one of many. But we do have RGB backlighting, of course. The corners are very nicely rounded off, and as are these edges of the top plate. There's no hard or sharp edges here. If we come around the back, we can see, again, solid metal. Feels very, very sturdy. I don't know what kind of metal this is. If it's an aluminum alloy, it's probably an aluminum alloy. I honestly don't know, but that's what it looks like anyway. We've got drop branding, drop enter, some certifications and things like that there. Nothing fancy. It's just in a subtle white font. The back is basically featureless in terms of molding and things like that. All we've got here is the flip out feet, 1 and 2, and and some anti-skid rubberized feet here. Other than that, yeah, that's it. And these edges, as you can see, very rounded off. Feels very nice and really weighty. Much heavier than I expected, like I said, for a supposedly entry-level keyboard. We have, of course, our USB Type-C port cutout over here. Other than that, a very simple design. Really nothing else to look at on any of the edges or back. I should also point out this keyboard does sit perfectly flat if you don't have those feet up. So if you like a 0-degree typing surface, then this board has you covered, which is nice. Moving back around to the front here, we have again this totally typical standard layout. The keycaps are made of ABS plastic, evidently, so not PBT, which is another differentiator between this board and the Control. However, they look really nice, and they actually feel really nice. They're textured in such a way that they have a PBT-like feel to them. Let's pull one of them off just to see it here. So we have this white keycap. It is double shot. Like I said, evidently it is ABS, but they do feel much nicer than typical ABS keycaps. They feel a bit more matte in their surface texture, and I think that will help them avoid shining up so much. They are also quite thick, thicker than you would typically see on budget keyboards, things that you might get around the $60 price point, say. These are definitely cut above your typical double shot ABS caps that you get from, say, most budget Chinese manufacturers. Also worth noting, the legends look really good. They don't have any of that blobbiness or stenciliness about them that you sometimes get with cheap keycaps. So overall, these are really nice feeling caps, and good looking caps too. The font choice is not super gamery or anything like that, and we have nice, closed characters. I think it looks great. Oh, but what I did want to show you, now that I've put that cap back on, was, very quickly, the switch we have seated in here is indeed a Gateron yellow, characteristic yellow stem there, and the switches are recessed into the board by a bit, so the tops of the switches sit just about flush with the top plate there. Not the stem, but the switch itself. And consequently, the bottoms of the keycaps sit just about flush with the top plate there. And I think that's a nice look, having them slightly recessed like that. Again, another differentiator from the design of the Control, which has the more typical, or maybe not more typical, but the floating island style where everything sits right on top of the top plate rather than being slightly recessed down in there. Something to check out is, of course, the stabilizers. Let's listen here. I'm a little leery about this because the stabilizers on the Control they are not one of that board's strong points. So let's see how they are here. Okay. Reasonably rattly. Shift doesn't feel too bad. Okay, so I would say they're pretty average. They're not awful. They're not egregiously rattly or scratchy or anything, but they definitely do have some rattle to them, and that spacebar is not sounding amazing by any stretch. Let's take off a cap though. Check to see if they're factory lubricated, which I don't think they are. They do not feel like it, but I've been wrong before. No, they're certainly not. They are dry as a bone. So they feel, reasonably good, but there's no lubrication there, which I suppose on something billed as an entry-level keyboard, I wouldn't expect there to be necessarily, but I have reviewed cheaper boards that did come with factory lube stabilizers, so it would be a nice touch. Especially because as much as this is an entry-level board, it is also, people who are interested in a entry-level, a solid entry-level mechanical keyboard are already verging sort of into enthusiast territory, right? They're looking beyond the membrane boards or beyond, a Razer or Logitech board, for example. So, it would be a nice nod to the usage experience if they lube those stabilizers, but they do not. And of course, this is not a hot swap board. That is one of the biggest differentiators between this board and the control. Is that the control, well, you can swap out the switches to your heart's delight. With the Enter, you cannot, and that is perhaps the most disappointing feature cut from the control, because I think it's something that's becoming more common these days, even at lower price points. I've seen boards, again, cheaper than this, that feature full hot swap sockets, and it's something that really increases the value, especially for someone just looking to get into the hobby, because when you're not familiar with mechanical keyboards and switches, you don't know what different switch types feel like, and so the advantage of being able to swap out switches and try out new ones, and also know that when you're buying a board, you're not committing to only that typing feel. You can modify it after the fact. That really helps a beginning buyer, I think, someone just getting into the hobby. So it is disappointing to me that Drop opted not to include hot swap switches on their Enter. Nevertheless, we will, of course, give this a test and see how it feels with the stock-equipped Gateron yellows. The final thing to do here is to give it the flex test, and I don't think this is going to flex much because, again, I will say, very impressed with the build quality and the solidity. Just listen. There is no hollow sound here. This is a very solid, compact, well-built feeling keyboard. Let's go for that flex test, shall we? Yeah, there's like nothing. Now, this thing is super rigid because of this gigantic metal case here, which was a very good choice on Drop's part. I think it confers a real feeling of solidity and reliability here. And honestly, I don't think the plastic top plate is a bad choice either. I think it pairs nicely. I think it still feels quite durable, and it allows them to swap out colors very easily as well. Okay, so now that we've inspected the board and packaging and all that stuff, it's time to take it and plug it in. So we're going to look at the RGB backlighting and any function layer shortcuts and stuff like that. And then, of course, we'll take it for a typing test as well. Let's get to it. And here we have the Drop Enter plugged in and illuminated. Now, usually I do my homework pretty well before I do an unboxing, but apparently not so well this time, because when I said we're going to look at the RGB backlighting, I was very wrong, there is no RGB backlighting on this board. There is merely a fixed white backlight. That is the only backlighting you get. And I suppose I probably made an assumption just based on expectations. RGB backlighting is pretty much a given on boards in this price range in this day and age, but the Enter eschews that option in favor of this fixed white backlight, which it does exhibit a certain commitment to simplicity, a certain focus, a certain purity of intent, if you will. I do think it's a very interesting choice on Drop's part, but anyway, there it is. Another couple of very minor corrections, or well, corrections anyway. I said that these are ABS doubleshot keycaps, but I said that they feel an awful lot like PBT. Turns out they are PBT keycaps, so the plastic they are made of is not ABS, but rather PBT, which is a higher quality enthusiast-grade material for keycaps. I could have sworn I saw some marketing copy at one point that said these boards were shipping with ABS keycaps, but maybe that was before they were actually shipping, maybe it changed, or maybe I was confused. I don't know. Anyway, PBT caps across the whole board, which would explain why they look and feel so much like PBT. Final point of clarification, I wasn't quite sure what kind of metal the case is made of. I surmised aluminum, and that is correct. Anodized aluminum is the material of choice for the case, not the top plate, mind you, that is plastic, but the case, the bottom portion, is a sturdy, thick, anodized aluminum. So, with those clarifications out of the way, let's talk about this backlight again for just a moment. You might notice that it looks quite warm, a very almost yellowish tinged backlight, and that is true to life. I'm trying to get the white balance on this as accurate as possible because I want you to see that it is a very warm backlight, and unfortunately that warm backlight doesn't quite match the neutral white of the keyboard itself, of the top plate of the keycaps. And so it does end up kind of tinging everything a little bit yellowish and not looking quite as clean as I think it could. I will say it is quite easy on the eyes. It's a nice soft warm white. There is no flicker visible in person, and I don't think you're seeing any flicker through the camera either, although you may see a little bit. If so, that's simply an artifact of the interaction between the frequency of the LEDs and the shutter speed of the camera. It's not something you see in real life, but I don't think there's much flicker on the camera, if any, and that's generally a sign of good quality LEDs. Obviously, they're all illuminated. None of them are out, which is good. One should certainly expect that of a board at this price point and of this quality. There is no configurability with this backlight. There's no patterns. There's no breathing. There's breathing mode. Nothing except a few brightness steps, which is actually kind of interesting. You hold down function and you press up and down. And actually, as I do that, you can see the flicker coming in on the camera there, can't you? Yeah, so you can turn off the backlight on this board, which is great because a lot of people might prefer to go without, given that they're unable to, configure it to be other colors. So, but if you just want a dimmer backlight, that is an option as well. And then once we get back up to full brightness, that flicker goes away. I will reiterate that flicker not visible in person, even on the lower brightness settings. It's only visible through the camera. That in itself is not especially interesting, the brightness adjustments on the backlight. What's interesting is that that shortcut combo function up and down over here is listed on that little instruction card that came packed in with the board you saw during the unboxing, listed as controlling screen brightness. Screen brightness. Not the case. It controls backlight brightness. I don't know why it says it controls screen brightness on that little slip of cardboard. Anyway, that is the case. Function Windows key will turn Windows key lock on or off. Handy feature to have, I suppose, fairly standard. Then we have media controls under the F1 through F7 buttons, with the exception of F4, which I believe controls display options. And then a handful of other basic Windows functions like opening, my computer and that stuff up here on function F8 through F12. And that is all we have. There are no other secondary functions on this board. There's no support for remapping keys, rebinding keys, neither in hardware nor through any kind of software, because regrettably, this keyboard does not support QMK, which is open source mechanical keyboard firmware that is configurable by the user and is supported by other drop boards like the Control, like the Alt. Unfortunately, QMK is not supported on the Enter, and I think that is a big missed opportunity, especially since this is being geared towards enthusiasts. Now, granted, it is entry-level enthusiast board. That is why they call it the Enter, of course. But I think they're doing even aspiring or budding enthusiasts a real disservice by not allowing for QMK configurability. And of course, Drop doesn't have its own software either, that it ships with its keyboards for remapping or anything. So without some kind of other third-party software, there's no way to rebind the keys on this board, and that is a real bummer. I do wish that they had included QMK support, especially because the microcontroller, the chip that is the brain of this board, my understanding is that it could easily support QMK. It is just not configured as such or allowed on this board. I honestly don't know what it would take to get it to work. Maybe some clever people have figured out a way to hack it into reality, but as far as I know, it's not available, and it's certainly not officially supported. So that is really everything there is to say and show about this board in terms of the functions and that sort of thing. It is a very, very simple board, perhaps a little too simple in some ways, but there is a certain, like I said, sort of admirable purity to it, I suppose. It is just a basic tenkeyless layout, white backlight. That's what you get. Take it or leave it, right? But we do have something left to do here, and that is, of course, the typing test. So we're going to give this a spin. You guys are going to get to see and hear it in action. Once again, this board is equipped with Gateron yellows, which are linear switches. So let's give it a listen. So you've had the opportunity now to see and hear the drop enter in action. It's time for me to summarize the pros and the cons of this board, and we're going to start out with the pros, the things that I think the enter gets quite right, and they are largely build quality related. The first pro is that thick aluminum case, and you guys saw when I took that keyboard out of the box and hefted it for the first time, it felt just the solidity of that case, and that the board is it's really quite impressive. It is much more solid than I expected it to be, and I almost wonder why it is the drop didn't just go with the aluminum on top as well. They're clearly not afraid to, spend on the premium materials here. My guess is just so that they could have different colored top plates, and that seems like an acceptable solution in retrospect, just because it does feel like a very solid board, even with that plastic top plate. That thick aluminum plate or aluminum case really confers a sense of solidity to this board. Continuing the theme of really premium materials, the keycaps are indeed doubleshot PBT, and I will reiterate, I actually got this wrong when I was unboxing the board. I said they were ABS. I really don't know where I got that idea, but I could swear I read that somewhere, but they're not. They're made of PBT, which is a more desirable, enthusiast-grade premium material, if you will. And they are double shot, which means that they are made of two fused pieces of plastic, and the legends will never wear out. They are not laser etched or printed on or anything like that. They are literally made out of just two pieces of fused plastic. So these keycaps, not only do they feel good, they're nice and thick, they're made of a premium plastic, they will basically last you forever. So big props to drop for the excellent keycaps on this board. And finally, I have to say that at least the board has backlighting. Now, it's only white backlighting, it's not RGB. We'll get to that in the next section, but it's better than no backlighting, right? Certainly, it's my preference that a board at least has some backlighting, because I often use my boards in a darkened room, and even though I am generally a touch typist, sometimes there's a key that you might forget where it is in the nav cluster or something like that. It's nice to have the backlight option, so nice to see. However, I don't think that drop quite hit the mark in every aspect of this board, and there are a few cons that I think are important to discuss. The first is that this keyboard has fairly rattly stabilizers. They are not factory lubricated, and while the quality is fine, they're certainly not the best I've used, and I really think that just lubing these stabilizers from the factory would go a long way to conferring a more premium typing feel to the enter. It doesn't feel bad to type on. I would say it's above average, probably, but ostensibly this is a board that is focused on a premium enthusiast experience at a, granted a somewhat lower price point, but I don't think it would cost them that much to lube the stabilizers from the factory. I've certainly seen cheaper keyboards that do have lubed stabilizers, and I really think it would help. It's just a polish thing, I guess. I think it would really help drive home that this keyboard is simplified and cut down with a very specific purpose in mind, and that is to feel premium. And rattly stabilizers are definitely not premium feeling. Another con that I want to bring up here is that there's no RGB backlighting. It's only a white backlight. And I know for some people this isn't a big deal at all. There's some people that think that RGB lighting is very gaudy, unnecessary, gamery, whatever. And I can appreciate that. I do appreciate simplicity and, sort of minimalist design. But I also think there's nothing wrong with having fun colored lighting, and a lot of people, in fact, do want that. I would go so far as to say that it's basically expected as a given these days on pretty much any mechanical keyboard, and especially mechanical keyboards priced at $90 US. Now, you could argue that there are a number of even more expensive enthusiast keyboards that don't have RGB backlighting, because that's not what a lot of enthusiasts want. Again, it's considered more of a gamery feature for many people, but not all. Certainly, there are many enthusiasts, myself included, who do enjoy having the option, and it would have been nice to have the option. Again, if you don't like it, you can just turn it off or set it to pure white or whatever. But in 2020, for a $90 keyboard, I honestly find the lack of RGB backlighting to be kind of shocking, to the point that I had assumed or imagined that this board had it, and I said as much during the unboxing, only to be proven wrong when we got to plugging it in. So, surprising, to say the least, that there's no RGB backlighting. Similarly surprising is the lack of QMK support. QMK, I will remind you once again, is open source keyboard firmware that allows you to basically program your layout and bindings to be exactly how you want them. And this is something that Drop includes with their Control and Alt keyboards, which admittedly, are significantly more expensive. But QMK is open source. It's not something that Drop has to develop in-house, right? So the fact that there's no QMK support on this board really surprises me yet again, because this is aimed at enthusiasts, at people who might want to be able to tinker with their layout, to get their hands dirty, messing around in QMK. So, surprising to me that their other boards support this, but not the ENTR. I think it would have been a really nice thing to include in an entry-level, enthusiast-targeted keyboard. And finally, another strange thing that seems to run a little bit contrary to the proposed or proclaimed identity of this board is the fact that there are only 2 switch options to choose from when you buy this board. There is one linear option, there's one tactile option. You're getting either Gatoron Yellows or you're getting Halo Trues. Now, I have nothing against those switches. They are fine switches, and if this was a hot swappable board, which it's not, I would be more okay with having limited switch options at the point of purchase. But it seems somewhat egregious to me, and again, just perplexing that Drop would consider this to be an entry-level enthusiast board, but then would only include or only have these 2 switch options as choices. There are no clicky switches, none whatsoever. If you want the ENTR with a clicky switch, you are out of luck. If you want the ENTR with a heavier switch, you are out of luck. A lighter switch, like a Kale box switch, any number of other switches, you're out of luck. And that just seems so weird to me, because part of the joy of being a mechanical keyboard enthusiast is getting to experience all these different feels and to be able to customize it to be exactly the way you like. Of course, my preference is a hot swap PCB that lets you swap out the switches and experiment all you like. I think that would have been a really nice thing to include with the ENTR, because it would make this such a solid, easy recommendation for a budding keyboard enthusiast, because it would be a great platform on which to experiment and expand. Drop did not go that route, and I do sort of understand why. That does add a fair bit of cost, and it does sort of muddy the waters between the ENTR and perhaps their more premium boards like the Control, which do feature hot swap sockets. So, it's a differentiator point. But I will say I've reviewed other keyboards that were cheaper than the ENTR that did have hot swap sockets. And in the absence of hot swap sockets, at the very least, I think Drop has to offer more switch options, at least a clicky switch option, because that audience is completely not served right now by this board. So, as I said, I just find it a perplexing, head-scratching kind of choice on Drop's part that they include, or they offer only 2 switch options with the Enter. So what then is my final verdict on the Drop Enter keyboard? Well, you may have gotten the idea now that this board is not what I expected. I was anticipating a mainstream targeted board that had all the features that one would expect of a budget mechanical keyboard in 2020. You know, things like RGB backlighting, things like software remapping and rebinding of keys, that kind of stuff. And that it would be targeted more at a mainstream, gamer primarily audience. But that is not the case. Drop has designed something very different here. What Drop has created is a keyboard that is ostensibly intended for people who are looking for a more premium keyboard experience, something that enters the more enthusiast echelons of the hobby, sort of puts one toe in there, without being super complicated or crazy expensive. And to that end, they pared this board way down. They cut it way back to focus on just the essentials, to focus on mostly build quality using premium materials like aluminum, like PBT, to create a very, very simple, solid, no frills board that is supposed to prioritize a typing experience, a solid foundation of a good feeling typing experience over all else. So does it pay off? Well, yes and no. I will say that the Drop Enter absolutely nails it in terms of build quality. You will be hard pressed to find a keyboard that feels and looks more solid than the Drop Enter at the $90 price point. The focus on the use of premium materials like anodized aluminum, like PBT keycaps, really does show and is quite apparent in the way this keyboard looks and feels. And if that is your primary focus, is build quality and solidity, and you have a hard cap on your budget of about $100 US, then I think you should absolutely check out the Enter. It is well worth your consideration. But I can't help but feel that some consumers, maybe the majority of consumers, are expecting a bit more out of a $90 keyboard, especially because many of the target purchasers of this board, at least as I see it, will be gamers who have maybe used a cheap mechanical keyboard for a while and are looking to step up to something that feels a bit more premium, dip their toes into the hobby of mechanical keyboards as an enthusiast. And I think those kinds of consumers coming from those kinds of boards will be disappointed by the lack of features on the Enter. It really is a cut down board that is very, very simple and lacks a lot of what people are used to with mechanical keyboards in 2020. Case in point, you can get a tenkeyless mechanical keyboard with RGB backlighting, fully configurable, side lighting, software remapping, and wireless functionality for half the price of the Drop Enter. Now, it's not going to look or feel nearly as nice or solid as the Enter, but that's a whole lot of additional value and a whole lot of functionality that you get there that is lacking with the Enter. And I think that's going to be a very hard sell for many potential buyers. Moreover, Drop made some very questionable choices for a keyboard that is ostensibly aimed at the entry-level enthusiast and is supposed to be all about the typing feel, the premium feeling experience. Things like those rattly stabilizers that weren't lubricated from the factory. Things like the lack of QMK support, the lack of remapping and rebinding. Things like only offering 2 switch types on this board, neither of which are clicky. I just can't quite wrap my head around why they would do that. And this seems to run contrary to the supposed proclaimed identity of this board. And so I think on some level you're left with a board that may not satisfy either camp, not the more gaming oriented consumer who is looking for a more feature rich and configurable experience, nor the budding enthusiast who's looking to get into that premium feeling experience when it comes to typing and using the keyboard. I don't know that either of them are especially well served by the Enter. Now, if I'm sounding overly negative, make no mistake, the Enter is a fine keyboard. And with a few tweaks or revisions or a modest price cut, I think it could even be a great keyboard. But as it stands, I feel like the Enter is kind of stuck between 2 worlds. It's not really a budget keyboard, but it's not truly premium either. It's not really good for gamers, but I don't think it will fully satisfy most enthusiasts either. Clearly, Drop tried to split the difference and make a board that would appeal to all kinds of people and create this entry-level enthusiast-grade experience. And while I think they succeed in some ways, I don't think they quite hit the mark in others. But maybe next time. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another relaxing review. Special thanks to drop.com for sending over the Enter that we took a look at here today. And if you are interested in picking up an Enter for yourself, there is, of course, a link down at the top of the video description where you can do exactly that. And as always, special thanks to each and every one of you for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you found this informative. I hope you found it relaxing. And I look very forward to having you back here next time for another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Bye for now, my friends.